Today is Tuesday, December the 18th, 2012. I'm Matthew T.G.
I'm Heath Mullican.
And I'm Tony Casey. Welcome to the Technology Show, a weekly podcast featuring technology, theology, and everything in between. This is episode 185. So, Heath, back in the studio with us.
Today begins my new Cal Ripken streak. I missed 2 shows in a row. So now I'm going to be in here to episode 370.
You know, Jeremy Gertis helped us out last week on the show, and he said that right here, that some of the best commentary he's ever heard from you was last week on the show.
Well, yeah, I can.
So you haven't even watched last week's episode yet. You
no, I'm still listen.
You need to take a look at that. I mean, we had this thing set right up there, and it was great. And we would turn to you every so often and just make sure everything was going good.
It's so weird seeing my face behind you with great theologians of the past. I'm not sure I belong in that.
Well, you don't belong there. I mean, it's only for one episode, okay? So
speaking of great theologians from the past, we do have a great book giveaway, Bonhoeffer, Pastor, Martyr, Prophet, Spy. And the winner of this book, this giveaway has been going on for about a month now. And this
2 weeks.
2 weeks. This is a great book. Makes a great doorstop. Matthew J. Hooper is our winner, first-time winner. So, Matthew, congratulations. You have won this book, and it is an amazing book. And then also today, if you're in the chat room, this is a one-time only. If you're in the chat room, I'll be there. If you want to enter to win today's guest book, The Respect Dare by Nina Rosener, you can enter in the chat room, and we will be giving away this book at the end of the show.
And I will be moderating the chat room for all your entries, so get on in there and let me know that you want in. I'll have a list collected, and towards the end of the show, we'll be ready to
All right,
roll.
and if you give us your contact information, mailing information today, we'll get that out today.
Yes.
And let's go ahead and jump to our guest. Today, our guest is Nina Rosener. She is the Executive Director of Greater Impact Ministries Incorporated, a Christian training organization. Nina has more than 20 years in the communications and training industry and has coached numerous executives, managers, individuals, wives, church staffs, and pastors around the country. She's been married to her husband, Jim, since 1991, and together they're privileged to be raising and homeschooling 3 children. Nina, welcome to the show.
Hi, Tony. How are you?
I'm doing well. We appreciate you taking time out to be with us today. As we bring you into the show today to talk about your book, The Respect Dare, for the sake of our listeners, there are 2 important questions. What is The Respect Dare, and why did you write it?
Well, The Respect Dare is a 40-day experience. It's a little different than a devotional because there's some teaching in there, but it's also an experience where you get to connect with God a little deeper and learn some things about how to respect your husband and obey that verse, Ephesians 5:33, which says the wife shall respect her husband. I wrote it because there's an awful lot of mixed messages and confusion, just even within the Christian culture, about what respect looks like, and then how do you apply that to your marriage, and very specifically, how does a wife respect her husband? What does that look like? I've heard everything from women are to be the shadow of their husbands to, women need to be in charge in their homes. So there's even within the Christian culture, there's this huge gamut.
Right.
And my husband and I saw the movie Fireproof, which was just awesome. And, the whole love dare thing. And I thought it was a fabulous allegory for Christ and the church, and a man giving his life up for his wife, just like Christ does for us. And my husband and I were talking about how there wasn't that communication for women about what does respect look like. So God created the Respect Dare, and we wrote it. It just happened.
Going through the Respect Dare, I'm kind of struck by the spiritual formation aspect of the book. I mean, literally, if someone goes through this book for 40 days, they're literally building some spiritual discipline. So what role does spiritual discipline play in relationship dynamics?
Well, I think our relationship with God is absolutely foundational and key to success and health in every relationship that we have. Yeah, I looked at, yesterday The Atlantic published an article that I wrote for their column, The Sexes, and I took a whole lot of heat. There was some 90-some comments, and a lot of them were really aggressive and very angry. And a lot of them were secular folks that were upset and very disrespectful and actually very mean in the way that they communicated. And so if I have an opposing viewpoint and I'm just meeting someone and we're at spiritual ends of the spectrum, both of us far from God, then you're going to have a lot of conflict. When someone is closer to God, you can respond like Jesus does. And I was thrilled to see, and I see this as growth for myself, that I didn't get my feelings hurt by any of the comments yesterday. I just felt sad for the people that hurt so much and were so threatened by the concept. And so when you look at your relationships one-on-one with people, the closer we are to Christ, the less our own egos, our identity are wrapped up in being right and having to be perfect, all those things. And so we can work out what the best solution is, which is often, especially in marriage, something that neither of us have thought of. So my husband might have an opinion, I might have an opinion, we get together, and because we know the Lord, his best shows up in the solution.
Yeah, we had a professor from Asbury Seminary, Dr. Joe Donjo, on our show some months ago, and we got into the whole Ephesians thing, and he makes a great point, and he really hammers this away, that we will take the last three chapters of Ephesians, and we talk about, well, you must do this, you must do this, you must do this. He said, but we ignore the first three chapters of that book, and those first three chapters about how we have submitted ourselves to the Lordship of Jesus Christ. And his point is that until I've done that, then it's pretty hard to follow through on the last three chapters of the book. And I feel like going through this book that you wrote, that is what undergirds this book. I mean, are we close on that?
Oh, you're 100% right.
Yeah.
And in this culture that we live in, we have a really hard time choosing to obey God when we don't understand it. And so the dares themselves, kind of force action, if you will. And women wrestle like crazy. I get email once in a while that says something like, I took a chunk of drywall out of my house today when I threw your book at the wall. But I want you to know that, it's been a few hours and I understand now what that was about. And so I kind of go, okay. And, but it is a wrestling because we have to submit to God. We don't like to sometimes. I don't know about you, but I'm a disobedient child, sometimes without even knowing it. And so when we submit to him, when we obey him, then we're doing things in relationships that are right. Yeah. And then eventually our feelings, and I think this is the thing that really hangs up women and some men, but a lot of women get hung up on, well, I feel this way and therefore my feelings aren't wrong. But I think we often have feelings based on things that are lies. And so once we start obeying God and doing what he tells us to do, we see the fruit in that, and then our feelings can then change.
I'm sure I'm not the first one that's pointed this out since you wrote this book, but I mean, you say things in here that would be pretty hard for a guy to just come out and say. I mean, I'm seriously, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I have a question in there somewhere, and that is, I mean, in some respects, do you get a hearing because you are a woman saying these things?
Yes, and I've been a terrible example. I mean, my early years of existence and up until I was about 20-some years old, I was not a Christian. And then even probably 5-10 years into being a Christian, I wasn't very good at it. I didn't really get it. When I figured out relationship with Christ, when he became everything, then suddenly all these mistakes that I've made are wonderful ways to connect with women that are doing the same things and suffering and having these painful places that they live, but we can relate to each other. And God's given me this mess of a life to clean up and start obeying him so that I can connect with these gals that are suffering. And there's a lot of that going on. We're bitter, we're angry, and we don't communicate well, and then we don't apologize well, and we make bad decisions.
Yeah.
And so there's a proverb that says, a woman tears down her house with her own hands. We do that, and I've done that. It's miraculous that I'm married today.
It's so good, and the perspective that you come from, I think, adds credence. Why do you think it's important to actually do these dares?
Sometimes we think that if we don't feel a certain way, that the action is a lie, but God doesn't tell us to wait until you feel good about listening to your husband or speaking a kind word or whatever. He just says to do this.
Yeah.
And so, and James 1:19, I believe, or maybe it's 4:19. You're a pastor, you probably know. One of those says that you know the good that you should do, and you don't do it, you're sinning.
Yeah.
And so when we're tearing down people around us, we're doing the opposite. And so instead, I tell women, okay, today you're going to build up your husband. You're going to find a strength, and you're going to communicate that. Whether you feel like it or not, that's today's dare. And the more that we do that, we see that the word is so true, and it's alive, and it has power in our relationships in the here and now. And I hear from women all over the world that it changes their relationships with all the people in their family.
Yeah, and this is why I say that I feel like that there's a strong spiritual formation / spiritual discipline aspect to this book, because much of what Christ calls us to do, we're not always going to feel like doing it. And outside of our relationship with our spouse, this can apply in every context of our lives and in every relationship we have with anybody.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And if you read, the purpose of what he did was to set an example for us, to save us. And what did he do? He gave up everything. He laid down his life for us. And so I call women to suffer, to choose to lay down this stuff, and it's all gain. Will you lay down your pride and serve your husband?
Yeah, at one point, I forgive me, I don't remember where I read it in here, and I don't even remember which dare it was connected to, but you anticipate questions, and I'm sure you've heard these questions before. So like one was, well, what if he doesn't deserve this?
Yeah. Well, you know what? He doesn't deserve it. And I don't deserve his love.
Yeah.
I don't deserve anything. If you want to talk about what we deserve, I deserve the fires of hell.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
My sin has nailed Christ to that cross, and so is yours, and so is every other human being alive. It is not for us to say that if he will, then I will. That's not anywhere in the book. We are called to serve, to obey. And John 14:24 says very specifically, those who love me obey my teaching. So let's obey.
Yeah.
Whether we do it or not, let's just do it.
Very good.
Nina, I'm wondering your take on the best way that this resource can be used. I know it's written, for individuals, but I know there's some small group resources as well that go along with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a small group guide that right now is only available on Amazon, and we love having women around the country that get into small groups and do this thing together. We make ourselves available, our ministry does, to answer questions, and there's some video teaching that's out there. Also, we have an e-course that women can do online if they can't find a small group.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, and then we're also putting together a resource where if you don't want to do the e-course, you don't want any accountability or encouragement, then okay, fine, you can get some teaching along with that, and it's delivered weekly by email. But the small group experience is huge. If you look at, I love this month because we're talking about Jesus and Elizabeth and Mary, and what God gave to Mary. The first thing he gave to her after the angel left was the gift of community. He told her about Elizabeth's pregnancy.
Wow.
And so what'd she do? She packed up her stuff and she left. And she spent 6 months in community with this older, wiser woman who was going to give birth to John Baptist. And what a blessing for them. And we find that women, one of the mistakes we make is we try to turn our husbands into our girlfriends. We need this girl time because we need it, and it doesn't work well in marriage for the most part. I mean, some people can do that, and I have a great friend in my husband, but it's different. And I won't bore you with that. It's definitely not a male thing, and you probably just don't want to know what we do. I was in Target the other day, and I was in the feminine aisle, and I'm sorry to do this to you, but it's really good.
Go ahead.
And this woman comes in, and we're talking about these things, and then within 3 minutes, we're talking about menopause. And then my husband comes into the aisle. He hears like 6 seconds. He turns around, he walks out. He's like, oh. Men don't do that. And women will connect with anybody. I mean, we're wired to do that by God, and we connect very quickly. And the relationship element, the locking arms to walk through being a woman of strength and dignity is best done in community. So we just encourage people to either do this group thing.
I got the impression that you really want to see women go through this with someone else, that this isn't the book where I just sit alone and do it. And I mean, I think that I thought the e-course thing was great. I think it's a great option, but I also believe that there's something that happens when we're face-to-face in a group dynamic with people that's not going to happen necessarily in an online situation.
Yes. Oh, I fully agree with that. And the e-course is there just to support women that can't find a group, can't get one, but we really encourage the small group aspect, and we talk to small group leaders all the time just to encourage them and help them facilitate their small groups, because there's so much that you can talk about during the meetings.
Well, listen, before we let you go, tell our listeners where they can find you on the internet, where they can get these resources again. And maybe just anything else, any other suggestions, or maybe just some things you'd want to pull out of this book real quick that we didn't even discuss.
Okay. One of the things that I think is really important for women to know before they do the book is that every story probably won't relate to them, and every woman's life is different. We are not prescriptive in the way that we encourage women to do marriage. What we focus on is communication. And so here's God's word. What does he tell you to do with this? And then have some dialogue with your husband about how does that play out in real life in your marriage. And so that's one thing I'd let women know. The other thing I'd let men know is please don't buy this book and give it to your wives. That just won't go well. If you want to be covert, maybe talk to one of her friends or something. I would pray about it and then pick up the love dare and do that yourself first.
Hey, wait a minute. How about we send you addresses?
We should all just give this book out for Mother's Day. Give it out to all the
Okay.
We'll say it was your idea.
Yeah, you're not my friends today, are you? What'd I do?
No, we're just messing.
Hey, we have a question from the chat room real quick.
Yeah, there's actually a couple of questions, Nina. The first one was, as you were going through the process of writing this book, what was your husband's response in all of this as you were going through it?
Well, he had his response over the course of a decade. So I took the course in my own life. I did the book, if you will, for about a good 3 or 4 years, and then it became habit. And then when we wrote the book, he actually edited the book, and we had a huge conflict over how many frying pans there actually were, because that was one of my stories.
Oh, wow.
He insisted there was less than 10, and I was pretty sure there was 27, but so we landed on a different number, and I don't remember what it is. I think it's 17, but and I say that in jest. We didn't have a huge conflict. Kind of a fun discussion going, are you sure? Was it really that many? And I'm like, yeah, I think it was. But we're each other's number one fans. And the way that we do marriage is not going to be the way that you guys do marriage.
Right.
But the communication and what honors God is at the core of all of it. And so he was very supportive and encouraging throughout all of it, and he actually edited the book for us first before we sent it out. So.
One of the other questions was that during the interview you talked about how men use the language of respect, and so the question is, from your perspective, what is the language that most women kind of speak to each other?
You know, this is actually based in biological research, but God's word obviously is true, and he knew this before we figured this out that was scientific. But there's research behind how brain chemistry is different between men and women.
Wow.
Men have this natural competitive nature to them. They're wired to sense threat at any given moment, and so they'll respond with defensiveness if they are threatened or something competitive occurs. Women often will set that off unknowingly, and men will often set off the response in us, which is to be empathetic and compassionate. That's what we're wired about: relationships. We're focused on just drowning in this hormone called oxytocin, which bonds us to other people, and men don't have as much of that, and so they will inadvertently hurt our feelings. I have a page on my blog called 101 Ways a Man Can Show His Wife That He Loves Her. And I finally put it up because men kept asking me, okay, this is great what you've done for my wife, but you got anything for me? I mean, I want to, how do I love this woman? I'm like, well, you could ask her. What do you need love to you? That's where I always suggest they start. And then there's other things. So anyway, and I would encourage your listeners to ask their wives what communicates love to you. And then if you get stuck, you can always go look at my blog, I guess, for a list. I don't know.
Wow.
Well, again, anything else that maybe we didn't touch on in the book that you want to highlight before we let you go?
You know, I just really appreciate the opportunity to be here today and to get the word out. And I love what you guys do, and I love just the opportunity that technology affords us to connect and talk about things that wouldn't normally get talked about in this day and age. So I just appreciate you guys so much, and I hope your listeners, if they want more information, they can come to ninarosener.com and check out the blog, or go to therespectdare.com and just find out more about the book and the e-course, and we have free marriage information there too.
Wow.
So,
all right. Well, Nina, it's been a delight to have you on the show today. Thank you once again for giving us your time.
thank you.
Hey, thanks.
All right. Bye-bye.
And once again, if you are in the chat room watching live, we're giving away a copy of the Respect Dare live on the show today. And so if you want to just in the chat room let Matthew know that you want in. And great interview. I am, I typically, when I'm doing premarital counseling, give a copy of the Love Dare to the couple. And I think now it'd be good to give a copy of the Love Dare and the Respect Dare. Just
So, now,
really
I'll tell you
good.
what some men are going to appreciate about this book is I actually heard people, the Love Dare.
Yeah.
Some men respond that, well, I'm not saying this is a bad idea, but what about the other side of this coin?
Right.
And that's what this is. This is the other side of that coin.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I know that we just kept, especially me, I kept hammering away in the interview, but the big surprise to me in this book that I didn't see coming was the spiritual formation aspect of this. And it really is, if you're wanting to integrate spiritual discipline where it's going to maximize good relationship, I think it's certainly worth it.
Yeah, I think people who would go into the Respect Dare thinking, well, this is going to primarily help me in my relationship with my husband. I mean, that's not her target. Her target is to affect your relationship with God, and then your relationship with husband is just going to be a byproduct.
Exactly.
Of that.
She's going to get you there, but she's not going to get you there directly. She's going to go right through the Lordship of Jesus Christ. And this is why I say, if you're a guy and you read this book, there would be points of conviction here because it's getting to just core issues of Lordship. All right, let's move on to...
I was ready, and now I'm not because, oh, gracious.
Download of the week.
Okay, download of the week was a pretty obvious one.
Yes.
Well, what was it? Google Maps for iOS. Now, all you Android people, we know you have had it all over us with Google Maps and turn-by-turn direction. Well, that has all come to the iPhone
And in
now.
fact, there are now some Android users who are complaining, saying, why is the iOS app better than ours, or have some things in it that ours does not? And so Google's been like, it's coming now for you guys.
Let me ask you a question, both you guys. It seems to me that when Apple, it was kind of, people didn't know that they were going to pull Google Maps as the default, and then they put their own maps. And it's almost like Google said, okay, well, we're going to come back with an app with a vengeance.
Yeah. I honestly feel like Apple pulling Google as the default version made Google up their game, because I'll be honest.
That's what I think.
The previous Google Maps did not like it at all. Did not like it. Didn't have turn-by-turn directions.
Right.
It was deadly to try to follow the directions on your phone.
Deadly.
Apple Maps was not that much better. The Google Maps, I've been using it for a few days. What I love about it the most, besides the fact that it talks to me and it's such a soothing voice.
Finally, someone will talk to
Yes,
you.
yes. But if it tells you to go a certain way, like today I'm going to Tony's house and it's telling me to go a certain way, but I know a shortcut, I know a different way. It doesn't just keep me on the same route and keep telling me, no, you got to go back. It adjusts to the route that I am going. And it doesn't ever get to a point where it says, well, you're not even listening to me, and just shut off. But it is just, if you own an iPhone, you have to have.
I'm very, very, very,
have to
very
have
happy
this app.
with it. Yeah, pleased with it. All right, let's move on to.
I'm just so not ready. You got so much going on, but they said it. Dun, 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 dun. Ba, ba, dun, 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 dun,
Okay,
dun,
so-
dun. Sorry.
Read my lips.
I'm going to say this again.
I've never taken steroids or HGH.
I took the initiative in creating the internet.
The Macintosh, of all the machines I've ever seen, is the only one that meets that standard.
I'm not a crook.
If you know what you're doing here, slide out.
The study is a first step. Our results need to be tested with respect to gender and sexual orientation to verify. Christian Layer, a graduate student who authored a study that seems to suggest that watching porn may lead to short-term memory loss. Source, CBS News.
Scott has been able to show he has a conscience, thinking mind. We have scanned him several times, and his pattern of brain activity shows he is clearly choosing to answer our questions. We believe he knows who and where he is. Neuroscientist Professor Adrian Owen of the Brain and Mind Institute commenting on Scott Routley, who was believed to be in a vegetative state. Source, BBC.
If a leader is seeking to lead change, he or she must be willing to stay at the organization a sufficient time to see the change accomplished and to deal with any aftermath caused by the change. Tom Rayner, in an article he wrote entitled, When Leaders Lead Change Too Quickly. Source, TR Blog.
We are now looking at a brave new world, a new world of Dead Sea Scrolls scholarship.
First time we can read Hebrew like it was written 2,000 years ago.
This is the most significant breakthrough around the oldest known biblical document in the world.
The Leon Levy Dead Sea Scrolls Digitization Project is a project that deals with the documentation and imaging of the Dead Sea Scrolls for posterity.
The miracle takes place here. This facility of the Israel Antiquities Authority in Jerusalem has an imaging system like none other in the world.
The unique, amazing thing about this system is the amazing data captured with the system, which we can read and analyze in many different ways.
The uncovering of the Dead Sea Scrolls in the 1950s set off a great deal of excitement. However, with the passing of time, the Israel Antiquities Authority had to make painstaking measures to preserve these scrolls to ensure that they are kept under the most stringent conditions. The new digitization project creates a new reality.
The idea behind it is, first of all, to preserve the scrolls for future generations, and secondly, but just as important, to open the scrolls online to the public and the scholarly world alike.
Each fragment is imaged on both sides in 12 different wavelengths, 7 in the visible range and 5 in the near-infrared invisible range. This extracts both physical and textual information from the fragment.
We image every single fragment. We have 15,000 fragments, all of which we intend to image in the best possible way.
The real news is this highly sensitive photography and imaging system that enables detecting written characters which have become invisible to the naked eye.
You can really see into the insides of the parchment.
We will simply see much more on those colored images than we have ever been able to see in the past.
If you look closer, you'll see that you can actually see the ink underneath. Okay? And these are the kind of new readings that the scholars are really looking forward to.
It is hard to believe that NASA has something to do with the technology of this new project.
A way to look at the scrolls and to see if there are changes going on is to monitor them with spectral imaging. And that's really the basis for what we're doing.
The images and metadata will be uploaded onto a dedicated website.
It's not only preservation, it's also exposing the scrolls to the whole world through Google.
This then will result in a kind of paradise for the public at large and for scholars.
Spectral imaging will yield new readings of the text that will assist scholars to further their research. This cutting-edge technology will showcase the oldest known copies of Scripture to the whole world.
We will have the possibility of making searches, and all this freely available on the internet. Truly a brave new world for all those interested in the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Let's see. I'm going to tell you that the one thing that gets me on this is they're able, because they've scanned this in different layers and using different lights, that things that they have not been able to see before, and you saw there on the bottom of that where it looked like burnt or something or degradation, you can see the print, and then to think that this is going to be made available to anybody. And also, this video doesn't say it, but Google is the one who's behind all this.
And once they scan it in, Google will actually own the Dead Sea Scrolls. It'll belong to them.
Yeah. Thanks for the disinformation there. We start this public outrage thing. But yeah, this is a story to follow. We covered this about a year and a half ago when they first started. They did a few manuscripts. They're going to do the whole library. And they're going to have a website that's totally dedicated to nothing but the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Fascinating.
Pretty awesome. So let's go back up to the first story here. This is one that you actually sent me here, Heath, and it's the whole story of the possibility of short-term memory loss for those that view porn. Kind of a fascinating article, really. And this article, or the study/article, gets into the physiological things that happen when people are viewing porn. Now, I can tell you right now there'll be critics of this big time because it's a very small, 20-some people in the research group. So you can't, as much as I would love to generalize from this, I understand from a research scientific point of view, you can't generalize from it. But for this little study, interesting.
One of the points in the article is that in previous research, they found that watching porn actually causes parts of the brain to shut down to redirect blood flow for sexual arousal. And I'm going to tell you, if if you read any books on addiction, if you read, there's a great book we've talked about on the show before about how porn affects the brain. It is scary because we will not see the true results of this probably for maybe 10 or 15, 20 years, because we're going to see an entire generation who has grown up on the internet, grown up having access to internet pornography where it is so easily accessible. And we're going to see, I firmly believe we're going to see a generation of people who are for lack of a better term, stupid.
Well, listen, no, Matthew and I read a blog that, and it covers a number of things.
Right.
But one of those things it covers is internet porn.
Right.
And a person who was prohibited from viewing, being online for a long period of time. And he talked about his temptation, in this area before.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, this temptation has almost left his life. And this whole easy access to porn that the internet, the portal that it is for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'm looking forward. We're just racking our brains trying to figure out how to base a show off of this blog post. It is a very interesting.
I've sent it. Yeah, the one we're talking about. I've sent it to 3 pastors now to say, hey, please read this and give me some feedback, because Matthew and I both, agree. And the point I want to make out of that blog is the easy access to porn.
Yeah.
And also, now get this. So here's good folk advice, right? I have a friend about 50 years old, and his grandfather. I'm gonna really clean this up, okay?
Yeah.
He used to say to his grandson, "Listen, you just always need to remember, if you put yourself in a sexually compromised atmosphere, your brain stops working."
Yeah.
I'm cleaning it up, but that is what he said. And you look at this research, and this is what with the whole blood flow thing. That there are parts of the brain that just shut down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's strange to me is the addiction to porn. We think is so easy to hide, but again, if you read the research, you read the medical studies, it affects the brain the same way as cocaine. So someone who is addicted to cocaine, it has a major effect on their brain function. Yeah. And sooner or later, it really does eat your brain.
But the difference between those two things and the one I highlight here is access.
Oh yeah.
So to get my cocaine fix, I've got to risk going out.
Yeah.
That's not the case for someone addicted to porn.
No.
All right. This article that I did that they said it from, Steve Stanley sent this to me, and this one will really press you against the wall. It's from the BBC, and it's about this guy who, Scott Routley, who they believed was a vegetable. He's in a home, he had an accident, can't communicate, and so they came up with a new way of brain imaging and communicating with this guy. And so, as I read here in this little piece, he says, hey, Scott knows where he is, and he knows what's happened to him, and he's able to communicate that to me.
Wow.
Yeah, and so, the moral dilemmas that challenge us, this article here it's not going to make you feel any more comfortable.
No.
I just promise you. Finally, this blog post from Tom Rainer, things you need to understand about changing too quick. And so he had 5 things in his blog. We're going to read through these real fast.
Okay, number 1, understand the change tolerance of those directly impacted.
Understand that change tolerance is contextually driven.
Understand that most change resistant is emotional, not rational.
Understand that leaders must have sufficient tenure to deal with the change.
And finally, understand that leaders must understand themselves in leading change.
And I understand that the word understand was used a lot in those 5 things.
You got a lot to understand.
I've come to a whole new understanding.
Do you understand that? He starts this out, it's a little disconcerting because he starts out with anecdotal stories of pastors who went to pretty large churches and dug their heels in to bring change. And by the time it was done, hundreds of people were gone, and they were gone too.
Yeah, I've been at my church 2 years. we have gone through a lot of changes. We merged with another church. We changed our name. That is typically not something you do in your first 2 years, but I came into a situation where people were ready for change. The previous pastor had planted seeds of change, and so I really appreciated this. This article, kind of in hindsight, in that most churches are either one or two changes from explosive growth or closing their doors, and you have to be very careful. And a lot of those times, it's the same change. It's just how you make it, and so it's just you have to tread carefully and make sure it's a God thing and not a ego thing.
Yeah. I thought one of the great points that he made here was that you have to have sufficient tenure to deal with change. I do think that there's something to that. And again, Tom Roesner, if you know anything about him, he researches this stuff. So he's coming not from, I've got some anecdotal stories. Yes, he has some of those, but he also does research, qualitative studies, and this is something that he's seeing over and over again, that you have to have some kind of authority base from which you can lead change.
Right. And that, man, it's a delicate line to walk in a ministry context, because you can be perceived one of two ways if you don't handle it right. I've had friends who have jumped in and it's change right up front, and that's disaster. And then there are others who jump in and there's no change whatsoever, and the rationale is, well, we just need to get my feet under myself, and yet it continues that way, and so there's no change ever, and so nothing happens. And as I've tried to walk this line, for me it is jumping in. I've had two churches with that I've been able to influence, and that first year for me, man, I'm just always careful.
Nerve-wracking.
It really is me just going in and saying, hey, I'm going to be observational. I just want to see how we're doing stuff. And there's stuff that catches you by surprise. There's stuff that you're very thankful for, saying, I'm glad I didn't change that right up front, because I understand this is a very valuable thing, or this is very important to the lives of people. And then there's some things that jump out and you be like, this obviously needs change. After a year, you're like, this got to be changed. One of the most surprising things for me is, in some places there's just the assumption going in that you're going to know how the church works and what's special to the church and what they do that's unique to them. And man, if you went in and just made changes, you're going to hurt some feelings. Yeah. It's a tough one, man. It is a tough one.
And also too, even with yourself as pastor, to say, how much of this change do I want personally, or how much of this is really related to kingdom building?
Right.
You know? And so you're fighting it at three different fronts. Your own self, like, well, is this something I just prefer?
Yeah.
And then you have the kingdom. Okay, what's best for the kingdom? And then some people will say, well, that's a sacred cow, but that sacred cow needs to be slaughtered.
Yeah,
Right.
And so it's picking your battles. It's deciding, what takes priority in change. Where do we invest ourselves right up front and the hardest, and fight the hardest on those things, or I guess fighting. I don't know if that's the best word to use.
Here's what I like about this. When we go to conferences, we always hear the success stories about change. So they put someone up there and they talk about how they hammered through change, and and there was some struggle, but in the end, bless God, we did it, and we moved ahead and we went forward. And what Roesner is saying, and he's just publishing, hey, wait, there are other stories that don't end good, and that there are some things that we can learn from this.
Yeah. I think we've talked about this on the show before, but this is a cross-denominational thing. This is a nationwide thing. The whole concept of the church boss, that so many times change is resistant just because of one powerful personality within the church. And I would say that 100% of positive change that is successful in churches is because either for some reason that person is removed from leadership or from power, or they lose their influence, or it's a pastor building a relationship. And I think too many times pastors come in, they see the church boss, and there's automatically this tension, when I know story after story of pastors who come in, make that person their best friend, and they lead
John
together.
Maxwell was particularly good at that, where he would come into a context and he would he would, like a heat-sinking missile, find out who the church boss was. He would get them on his side.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, seriously. But if you know John Maxwell, I don't know him, but I've been around him at speaking and his books. He is very charismatic. He has the power of personality that is persuasive. That's not going to work. I also know other stories. I've been to conferences where the pastor had to have a showdown with the church boss, and the church boss not only left, but took 125 people with him and 75% of the finances.
I can see, we talk about that conflict, and I see the old Western style.
Yeah.
Pastor.
High noon.
That's right.
With Gary Cooper.
And that tumbleweed rolls by.
You guys talked about conferences. I think a lot of times pastors go to conferences and they get all these ideas and they just go back and try to implement them cold turkey.
Yeah.
And I know
Bad news.
stories of where they
bad news, man.
That's a bad
news. Let me offer or reiterate a recommendation for our non-live viewers who aren't in the chat room. Paul Tillman reminds us about a friend of the show, Bob Weitzel, and he has a resource called Preparing for Change Reaction. And what that does, how people receive change, and just kind of getting your understanding on that. I've heard him do a seminar on some of this stuff, and it's good stuff.
All right.
Very good stuff. So go look that up.
Yep.
Okay, real quick here. This is off script. So Heath, what are you gonna be doing for Christmas, man?
We're staying in town. Our family's trying to develop some new personal traditions that we started last year. So
is wrestling going to be in that or no? I mean,
there is a show Saturday night
See,
that
I
we
knew,
may be
I
going
knew,
to.
man.
So, but yeah, we're staying around, and then we've got the big Follow Youth Convention, which if you follow the hashtag Follow12, I'll be doing all the social media there. Very excited for that convention. So that's where I'll be spending most of my holidays.
Teach, what you doing?
I'll be doing the Techology Show live Yule log celebration. So tune in for that. It'll be all day long, Christmas Day, here on the Techology Show. And
gather the family around.
That's right. Just gather around the Techology Show and be warmed in heart and soul as you watch the Yule log burn. And I am totally kidding. I will not be doing any of that.
We just will have family here and open presents and trying to figure out a creative way to bring our son in virtually, because he's in Kuwait. So
hey, let's do a giveaway.
Let's do it.
All right. So this is for a copy of Nina Roesner's The Respect Dare. I've got random.org up and running, as well as all of your entries. So here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, can I have a drum roll? The winner is Dale Argott. Dale
Argott, who left the chat a few minutes ago, but Dale will be getting that book out.
Yeah, you get us your address, man, but you got to get it to us. What's the timeline here? What if nobody gets us their address?
I'm about to send him a message right now.
Then my wife gets the book.
Love it. All right, just to let you know, we're going to be off for a few weeks. So we are obviously not having a show on Christmas Day. We're not having a show on New Year's Day, and then for the three of us, we are involved in a pastors' gathering for our district on the Tuesday, on the 8th, January the 8th.
So, boy, you're going to be going through Techology Show withdrawal. So go back to the archives, find your favorite show, just rewatch that. Okay.
We'll be back with a vengeance on January the 15th. Got some good people already lined up going into next year. The director of Global Partners, Dennis Jackson, is going to be with us. Corey Pence. We have, the three of us have had conversations about him. He works at the international headquarters for the Wesleyan Church, and just really has a great eye for media, for attention to media, whether that be print or video. And so going to just do a whole show on that and trying to hopefully give some resources to local churches, and especially if you're in a ministry context where you're just limited. Also going to have Steve Corbett with us. He is author of When Helping Hurts. And then Dan Ryland's going to join us next year, early part of next year. He is the author of Amplified Leadership, works at, I think he's the executive pastor at 12 Stone down in Atlanta, and going to really enjoy that. All right. Let me just say we thank our listeners so much and our viewers for watching us for 2012. I think that, in March we will We'll complete 4.
Wow.
Yeah,
It's something wild like that. It's insane to think about, and it's not going to be long before we're at episode 200. We are knocking on 200's door, and that's just wild. As you go back to get your fix, please don't go back to the early episodes. They're shameful and embarrassing.
We've talked about pulling those down. I kind of think after this announcement, we ought to just pull down the early episodes.
Don't go back and watch episode 1.
We need to go start putting Easter eggs in all the old episodes that people can.
Oh, man.
No, just delete them forever.
Ignore those. Stick with about the past 100. I think we really were getting rolling about episode 100. So.
But even when we did the first episode, the idea of 100 episodes was,
was huge.
It's like, we'll never get there. We'll just do this thing. And
and we're hurting feelings. Elizabeth reminds us that she was a guest on one of our very.
That
was a great episode, Elizabeth. That was the exception to the rule.
We were talking about all the episodes except that one.
That's right.
We're glad that you brought that up. But again, thank you. It's been a great year for us. It really has.
Wow.
We've had some wonderful guests, and some really, Mark Batterson was one of our guests in 2012.
First off, first guest.
We had the number one book on the New York Times bestseller list at the time. Scott Burpo was on the show.
Todd Burpo.
Todd. We had Rachel Held Evans, which, her book blew up this year. And she was everywhere.
Yeah. Right. And we had her first. We had her before the Relevant podcast. Ooh.
And can we say this, that she really gave us some great props. Today's interview was as a result of she just said to the publisher, "Hey, really enjoyed my experience on that show. Get me more like that." Well, then about 3 weeks ago, I get from the publicist at Thomas
exciting.
Nelson, "Hey, how about we have this book coming out? I think that."
Kim Meyer, General Conference, Keith Drury, David Drury, tons of fun stuff this year. So.
General Conference was we got the new studio.
New ad-free live streaming, new website. Good gracious, tons has happened this year.
It's great working with you guys, man.
It
really is.
Oh boy, you sure didn't have to throw that in there.
Yeah, well, because you don't want to say it back.
It was awful. This dude is a slave driver.
Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, if you want to do any further research on the things that we discussed today, you can find all the links to the stories we covered at our website, thetechnologyshow.com. If you want to contact us, send your emails to thetechnologyshow@gmail.com. Or better yet, why don't you leave us a voicemail by calling us at 3049-TEOLOGY. That's 304-986-5649. Leave us a message. We may even play your comments on the air. As always, thanks for joining us. Have a Merry Christmas and a wonderful New Year. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Feliz Navidad.